Hello everyone, and welcome to Advanced English Conversation. My name is Tim Teacher. I'm going to be your conversation teacher for this term, and this is an intro video to the class. I'm joining you from a random Young Duck classroom, and apparently for the first 3 weeks we're going to be doing online courses. So this video isn't just a short introduction video to the course, how it's graded, all that stuff. So over here, I should have put up some sort of a PowerPoint. And we're going to go through that PowerPoint now so you guys understand all about the class and how I'm going to grade you, especially more so when we get into the classroom. It's going to be a little bit different when we're using Zoom for our classes, but for the most part, this is going to be how it's going to work when we are in the classroom. So let's get started. This class, how does it work exactly? Well, there are two different types of classes. And the first type of class is called a lesson class. A lesson class is when we're going to go over some language that we're going to learn, and basically I'm going to give you guys a video, you guys are going to watch the video, and you guys are going to try and figure out what the function is of that language. Now, don't worry right now if you're like, I don't know what a function is. Whoa.
Who cares?
Don't worry about it, because I'm going to go through that in a completely separate video. You'll pretty much see that in a link below. After you finish trying to figure out what the function of the language is, then we're going to move on to the practice phase, and that's where you try the language out, use the phrases that I give you, and basically you get to see if you can understand it. If you have any questions at that point, no worries. You're not going to be graded during that time in terms of your performance or anything like that. We're going to save evaluations for the second class, which is the activity class. The activity class is where I will give you some large task, and we'll all be, it could be mingling, it could be a group activity, it could be a partnered activity, it could be anything. But the point of this class is that I'm not going to evaluate you until you've had some time to practice during the lesson class, and then in the activity class, I'm going to try and use that time to evaluate you while you're using it in a real world kind of scenario. So that's pretty much how it works. Then, now we're going to look at the conversation class overall grading rubric. Pretty much, the grading rubric is set up so that there are 4 major categories. The first one is classroom evaluation, or your speaking. During the activity classes, I'm going to evaluate what you're saying, and you guys are going to try and do a task, and at the same time, try to use the language that we've learned in class. I'm going to field lots of questions. I know on Zoom you guys will have lots of questions. That's okay. That's worth 40%. You'll get 4 of these evaluations. That means that each evaluation is worth 10%. The next category is the final exam for the term. That will comprise of 20% of your final grade, and it will be one single test, and it will basically just be a closed exam. I'm going to put an example of a closed exam right here. It's basically a fill in the blank where there's going to be a bunch of empty spaces, and you guys have to fill in what it said. Now, we're not going to use this one at all. This is just an example. The one that we're going to be using is one where I will leave spaces out where you can put in the language that we learned in class. So hopefully that makes sense. The third category is the group discussion and participation. So at the beginning of the lesson classes, I will talk a little bit about the language and how to use it and all that stuff, and I'm going to ask lots of questions. One of the things about this class that's going to be different from other ones is that I want lots of participation. It's a time for you guys to speak. So you guys are going to have to answer questions, and when you do answer a question, then remember what you answered, because if you forget, you probably won't get any points for it. Come to me at the end of the class when the bell rings. You're going to line up, and then you're going to remind me what you said. Then I'm going to record it into my participation point book. That way you can see that you are getting the point. You can see how many points you have. You can see how many points other students have, so you know if you're falling behind. And basically it's a way for both of us to know that you're getting the points. So that's the third category. The last category is the worksheet category. Each lesson class, you will get a worksheet, and that worksheet, all you have to do is keep it nice and neat, fill in all the blanks. Even if we don't take it up, make sure the whole worksheet is filled out, and then you get pretty much a basic free 10%. It's probably the easiest marks you'll get in the class. So that is this slide finished. Next slide.
That's awesome!
So how do I grade your in-class evaluations? That's a good question. So I know that there are a few different ways to participate. You're going to be doing a task, and during that task, basically you'll have to participate, and it all depends on how much you try and use the language. That's how your grade works. So like I said, it's out of 10%. The top is no comment. You pretty much don't really do anything. You show up, you don't really say maybe a few monosyllabic answers like yes or no, and you don't really participate in the task. That's only a 4 out of 10 because participation isn't really worth much. You're still doing something, you may be listening and things like that, but again, this is a speaking class. So I really want you guys to speak. The next category is the active category. That's 7 out of 10. That means you showed up, you participated, you tried to complete the task, you used English to communicate pretty much the whole time, and you either unfortunately forgot to use the language or you just couldn't use it, you felt like you couldn't use it, and that's a 7 out of 10. And again, if you're active and you're trying, that's most of the activity. I'm glad that you're doing that. So that's 7 out of 10 marks. Partial category is you showed up to the class, everything that you did in the previous category is all true, and this time you actually tried to use the language, but you may not have used it correctly, like we discussed in class, or maybe you only used part of it, or it was a strange or awkward context, and that's worth between 8 to 9.5 points out of 10, depending on how accurate you were with the language. And the last one is you nailed it. You came to class, you were active, you did everything that you could to try and complete the task, you were helpful with others, you used the language and it was predominantly correct, meaning it was like mostly correct, even if a few errors, doesn't matter. And that's all that I can ask for, is that you come, you try to use the language, you try and do the task, and you're helpful with other students, and you try and create a nice class atmosphere for everyone. Because it's not easy getting up to the front and, saying things in front of other people, etc., 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 etc. So you can also lose marks on top of doing a really good job, though, and that's the infraction list, which is at the bottom down there. This could be inappropriate if you say things that are inappropriate, if you're only really participating when I'm around you or near you, because I'm usually not predominantly listening to the people that are directly next to me. I'm also keeping my head up and looking at what everyone's doing. So as long as you're participating the whole time, shouldn't have a problem. Being competitive and trying to not be helpful. So if you can help someone, then please do. I mean, this class, I want it to be the opposite of being competitive. I know in some other classes you may feel like you have to be, but in this class, I really don't want you to be competitive. You will get the grade that you deserve, and if you're helpful, that grade will go up. So being helpful with others actually increases your grade. It's a better thing, especially in the participation category. So if I see that you're being especially helpful, if a student can't think of a word and you provide it for them, or if they forget to use the language and you remind them, you're helping me and you're helping them to learn English better. And that's the whole point of this class, that I want you guys to learn as much English as you can. Because the goal of this course is to be comfortable speaking English, to use authentic phrases and expressions that help you be comfortable speaking to not only other ESL speakers, but also native speakers as well. Okay, on the next slide, this is how the participation category works. Participation is basically any time that we're having a full class discussion, you can get participation points and you can lose participation points as well. Speaking Korean. If you speak Korean, I'm not going to take off marks right away if it was an accidental thing, like you said something to your friend and you forgot that you were just speaking Korean. in the beginning, I know this will be very, very difficult, but I really want to foster an all English speaking environment in the classroom. And this is going to be helpful because all those little things that you say in Korean in between other English classes, that's time and opportunities you could be using English expressions and getting used to using it. So again, this category isn't for me to like punish you because you said a word here or there. It's really only there for students who kind of refuse to speak English in class, and I really want to avoid that. So basically, we're going to try and avoid using as much Korean as possible. And as long as you correct yourself, it should be no problem at all. So, second one, each student is required to have a name tag. Not a name tag here, I mean like a paper name tag. I'll show you on the first day of class anyways. Bring it to every single class. You can lose marks if you completely forget it and you can't provide one at the beginning of class. If you're disruptive or like bothering those around you who are trying to pay attention or anything like that, then you can lose marks as well in that way. Not following instructions. So if I give instructions and even if you're not sure you understand it, ask questions. I love questions. Questions are great. In fact, questions make my job and your job much easier. So at any point you can put up your hand and you can ask questions. Sleeping. Now I know a lot of you are going to be tired, but this is a performance class, which means that you can't sleep during the class. Unfortunately, there's no time for that. I only see you once a week, and in once a week, I mean, how am I even supposed to teach you very much in once a week? It's very, very difficult. So any sleeping, not acceptable. You'll lose marks immediately, and you'll continue to lose marks the longer that you sleep. Participation, the next category. Now, participation points where you do something good, you try and answer a question, you try, and even if you're wrong, you can still get more marks.
That's awesome!
So basically, and let me explain. You can't just put up your hand and say banana. That's not going to give you a point. You're only going to get a point if you put up your hand and you really try to answer. If it's something that someone has previously said, obviously I'm not going to give you a point for that. It has to be something new. But again, even if you're wrong, you can still get a point. And how many classes can you say, if you try and answer a question and you get it wrong, you get credit for that? Again, the point of this is to get you speaking. So that's why I put that in there. Worksheets, I think that's pretty much self-explanatory. You lose them, you're going to lose marks. If they're torn or completely destroyed or partially destroyed, then you can lose marks. If you basically don't fill it all out, you can lose marks, but I doubt any of you will do that. You all keep them. I suggest getting one of those little plastic sleeves and putting the paper inside one of those sleeves and just keeping them there. And also remember to bring them to every single class, because each class will build on the previous class, and each activity class you'll have a lot more language available to you to use. So if you bring your worksheets to every class and you just quickly review them before class, I'm sure that you'll do a great job, much better than a lot of previous years. Okay, on to the next slide. In terms of this class, I really wanted to express that my expectations of you are not to be exactly like native speakers. I know a lot of you are probably thinking, I really want to sound like a native speaker, and that would be amazing if you could help me do that. But the reality is, for most of you, even if you practice every day for a long time, you'll probably never sound indiscernible. But that's a good thing, because that's part of your identity. You're a Korean speaker first and an English speaker second or third or whatever. And I'm not going to push native speaker norms as standards for you guys. I know that you're ESL speakers, so I'm going to give you competency standards. If I can understand what you're saying and it's not too awkward, then that is good. That's competent. And the more competent that you are, the more information that you can pass along, and that's the point of speaking. So I'm going to cover most of these things in the next video, and where I'm going to talk about language in general and why I approach the class the way that I do, speaking versus writing, how important context is to language, and the most important part is language, learning it as functions rather than words, sentences, and grammar. Because I don't think it's super helpful to learn English as a system of rules and grammar. And I know many of you have had classes like that, where you walk in, 90% of the language being used in the class is Korean, and it's pretty much all grammar. And that's not really going to help you. That's just going to confuse you. It's going to make things worse. I want to engage fluency in each of you, and that's how I aim to teach the class. So I look forward to meeting all of you. I'm really excited about the year. I can't wait for classes to begin because I'm going crazy here in an empty school. Please check out the videos below, and don't forget, I'm going to give you a small assignment in the first week that we're going to discuss while we're using Zoom. So thank you, and I'll see you soon.